As the Second World War turned against the Germans, there were orders given to the SS to evacuate the concentration camps, and with this thousands of prisoners were marched towards other sites, and many were marched to their deaths. Some who were evacuated from sites close by to the sea were marched into the sea, where SS executioners shot them with their machine guns. But there were many more horrific killings that took place as the war came to an end, and it became a time where there were many war crimes that were committed also. One incredibly tragic and horrifying mass killing was the Gardelegen Massacre, in which over 1,000 forced slave labourers were forced into a barn, which was then torched and set on fire. In this one horrific act committed by the Germans, 1,016 prisoners were burned alive or were shot trying to escape. But what is the story of this? Join us today to look at the Gardelegen Massacre, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Some concentration camps at the end of the war became huge as transports of inmates from other sites were moved there. Bergen-Belsen, for example, saw much overcrowding, and disease and starvation was a big issue, as more people were sent to the camp, which completely broke down. On the 3rd and 4th of April 1945, the Germans were alerted to the fact the American army had crossed the Rhine, and they were pushing into Germany, and the SS camp guards at Mittelbau-Dora ordered the mass evacuation of prisoners from the main camps and the sub-camps. Himmler gave specific orders for no prisoners to fall into enemy hands, and with this executions were also ordered. At Mittelbau-Dora it's estimated that at least 1/3 of the 60,000 inmates died there during the war, and the Americans would around a week later liberate the prisoners who were left there. The prisoners who were evacuated were to be moved either by train or on death marches by foot to sites further north, nearby such as Bergen-Belsen, Neuengamme or Sachsenhausen. The evacuation order was put into place, and 4,000 prisoners from Mittelbau-Dora and the sub-camps were moved. They arrived in the area of Gardelegen, and they were forced to get off the freight cars they'd been carried on, as the Allies had damaged the rail lines to carry them any further. Because of this, the prisoners would have to finish the rest of their journey off by foot. This caused the SS a big problem, as the prisoners heavily outnumbered the guards and officials who were there to keep order and control, and there was a fear that the prisoners could overpower them and also escape. Because of this, the SS recruited many people from Gardelegen to help keep guard and to maintain order, and they recruited members of the German Home Guard, the Hitler Youth, Auxiliary Forces, and others who were still loyal to Hitler. As the Americans were approaching, there was a greater need for the SS to move the inmates quickly, and on April the 13th, around 1,000 prisoners who were weak and suffering were taken from Gardelegen to a huge barn which was found on a nearby estate. They were then driven into this barn building at gunpoint, and many of these people were sick and suffering from illness and the effects of their imprisonment. The guards forced these people into the barn. There was not enough space for people inside and it was very tight. The guards knew what they were about to do, and they then barricaded the doors to prevent any escape, and poured gasoline onto the straw and then torched it, engulfing the barn in flames. The heat and flames got more intense, and the prisoners began to panic, and they tried to escape, but they couldn't because of the barricaded doors. Some tried to dig their way out under the barn's walls, and they were shot dead. The following day the SS went back out to the barn to see what they could do in terms of disposing of the bodies and hiding the terrible war crime. They planned to burn the rest of the remains and also the barn and kill anyone who survived, but the Allies advanced, and specifically the advance of the 102nd Infantry Division, stopped the SS hiding all of the bodies and the evidence. On the 14th of April 1945, the 102nd came across Gardelegen, and they encountered very little resistance from the Germans. On the next day they came across the barn, and it was still smouldering. They then came across the trenches where the SS had dumped the burned remains of many people from the barn, but they also found the charred remains of people inside the barn who had not been buried. It was quite clear that a horrific Nazi war crime had taken place, and the press then reported what the Americans said. It spurred many on to fight until the very end, and to try and punish those who were the perpetrators. One American soldier said, "I never was so sure before of exactly what I was fighting for. Before this you would have said the stories were propaganda, but now you know they weren't. There are the bodies, and all of those guys are dead." It was a truly horrifying sight, and 11 prisoners who managed to survive the burning of the barn were found alive in the local area by Americans, and they were interviewed as to what happened. The Americans also found 20 men who had allegedly taken part in the massacre, and these were then rounded up and were shot and executed by them. But the week after the massacre was discovered, the American commander in charge ordered 300 men from the town to give the prisoners a proper and decent burial. The German civilians were forced to exhume almost 600 bodies from the trenches, and they recovered 430 bodies from the barn. Each of these were placed in an individually dug grave, and a ceremony then took place on the 25th of April. The townspeople were then entrusted with the job to forever look after the graves of the 1,016 victims. Colonel George Lynch spoke to the German civilians and he said that the German people have been told that the stories of German atrocities are Allied propaganda. Here you can see for yourself. Some will say that the Nazis were responsible for this crime. Others will point to the Gestapo. The responsibility rests with neither. It is the responsibility of the German people. Your so-called master race has demonstrated that it is a master of only crime, cruelty and sadism. You have lost the respect of the civilised world. There were investigations that occurred after the war to bring those who were the perpetrators of the massacre to justice. As mentioned, many local men who took part were shot dead shortly after in reprisal, but there was one man who was sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime, SS Untersturmführer Erhard Brandv, who served 3 years in prison before he died from leukemia. Today the site is a national memorial and a sign reads, "Here lie 1,016 Allied prisoners of war who were murdered by their captors. They were buried by citizens of Gardelegen, who are charged with the responsibility that graves are for, ever kept as green as the memory of those unfortunates will be kept in the hearts of freedom-loving men everywhere. Established under the supervision of the 102nd Infantry Division, United States Army. Vandalism will be punished by maximum penalties under laws of military government." A sign on the wall of the barn which survives says, "You stand in front of the ruins of a barn where one of the most cruel crimes of fascism was taking place." In the night of their liberation, a few hours before Allied forces approached, 1,016 international fighters of resistance against fascism were brutally and inhumanely burned alive. Whenever you feel apathy or weakness in fighting against fascism, an imperialistic threat of war, get new power from our unforgettable dead. The Gardelegen Massacre was a horrific war crime which was disgraceful, and in the final months of the war, the SS would slaughter over 1,000 people on this site. It was just one of many different war crimes which were carried out in the dying days of the conflict, and as the Allies advanced further towards the heart of Nazi Germany. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.